my boss's daughter, fired me on her first day running the business. She forgot one expensive detail. Before we begin, let me ask you something simple. Have you ever given your life, your best years, to something or someone, only to be discarded like a tool that's outlived its usefulness? Have you ever felt invisible in a room where you once mattered? If that sounds familiar, then what happened to me might hit a little closer than you'd expect. It was an overcast Tuesday morning in Mississauga, late April. The kind of damp gray sky that makes everything feel heavier than it should. The office lights at Anderson Manufacturing buzzed faintly above me as I stood across from her desk. Vanessa Anderson, 29. Recently returned from her MBA program in Vancouver, and the only daughter of my longtime boss, Malcolm Anderson. She didn't even look up when she said it, just tapped something into her tablet, flicked her wrist like she was swatting away a bug, and said, "We don't need old men like you dragging us down. It's time for change." That was it. No handshake. No thank you for 18 years of service. Just that line delivered like a mission statement. My name is Gordon Hale. I'm 59 years old. For nearly 2 decades, I was the operations director at Anderson Manufacturing, a company that helped build the bones of this city. We made specialized components for everything from commuter trains to hospital HVAC systems. My job wasn't glamorous. I wasn't the guy doing press releases or schmoozing at luncheons. I was the guy who knew how to keep the line running at 2 a.m. during an ice storm. The guy the team called when a shipment was stalled at the border and someone had to fix it now. That morning, I walked out of Vanessa's office without a word. Just nodded, once turned on my heel, and started packing my things. The younger staff kept their heads down, a few looked-up eyes flicking toward me like they might say something, but none did. I didn't blame them. Some of them I'd trained when they were still learning to punch in without help. Now they had mortgages, kids, the kind of things you protect by staying quiet when someone else gets axed. It would have been easy to feel humiliated, but I didn't. Because what Vanessa didn't know and never asked about was that I'd signed my last contract under her father's watch. And in that contract, buried 3 pages in, was a clause, a very specific one, a severance guarantee, 2 full years' salary if I was let go without formal cause, documented and justified. A clause Malcolm insisted on back when he said, "Gord, I never want to lose you to one of those firms out west." I carried my box through the parking lot without slamming the door, without saying a word. Just placed it on the passenger seat of my Silverado, sat down, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Through the windshield, I looked back at the building. I helped shape every system, every protocol, every hard-earned ounce of stability and thought. They're about to learn the cost of forgetting where you came from. I didn't go home right away. I drove to Lakeshore Road, to a quiet spot by the water, where Linda and I used to walk before the cancer took her. I parked, opened the glove box, and pulled out a card I'd been holding on to for a while. Harold Chen, corporate litigation lawyer, quiet, methodical, ruthless when he needed to be. I dialed. "Harold," I said when he picked up. "It's time." She made her move. "I've been waiting for this call," he replied. When I got home, the house felt too quiet, the air stale. I made coffee, sat at the table with the contract spread in front of me, and highlighted Section 14. Termination without cause. 24 months, full compensation. Enforceable under Ontario employment standards. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused, like a carpenter sharpening a blade before making the first cut. There's a kind of power in being underestimated. Vanessa thought she was cleaning house, thought pushing out the old guard made her a visionary. But she forgot one thing. Some of us didn't survive this long because we played nice. We survived because we knew how to listen, how to plan, how to wait, and most of all, how to build something that lasts. I called Thomas, our plant safety director, then Sheila, who'd run procurement like a tight ship for 12 years. Check your contracts, I told them, and don't say a word yet. And then I called Douglas Riley, CEO of North Point Components, a man who'd asked me to join his team 3 times in the last 5 years. This time, I didn't hesitate. You still looking for someone to build you a plant the right way? I asked. I thought you'd never ask, he said. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and smiled, not out of spite, not for revenge, but because a door had just opened, and I was already halfway through it. The next morning, the city felt different, colder, though it wasn't the weather. It was that specific kind of cold that comes after something final, like walking out of a funeral where no one cried. I stood in my garage with a mug of black coffee and stared at the shelf where my old Anderson manufacturing jacket still hung, blue canvas worn at the cuffs. I hadn't thrown it out, not yet. Inside, my phone buzzed again. Second time that morning. It was Thomas, this time short text. You were right. I had the same clause. Called Harold. I smiled. Not because I was glad he'd been fired, but because now it wasn't just me. Vanessa hadn't just underestimated me. She'd underestimated all of us. The house still smelled like cedar and old coffee grounds. It was the same place Linda and I had made a life in for 28 years. After she passed, I kept everything mostly the same. Her teacups, her hummingbird feeder, even her crossword books by the window. I didn't keep them because I couldn't move on. I kept them because they reminded me what mattered. And right now, what mattered was reminding people like Vanessa that we don't just disappear when we turn 50. We're still here. We still build. We still protect. That afternoon, I met Douglas Riley at a quiet pub in Oakville. He shook my hand like a man who'd been waiting too long to say I told you so. Douglas was older than me, but not by much. Ex-plant manager turned CEO. The kind of guy who still wore steel toes to board meetings. He didn't waste time. You've still got fire in you, he said over a pint. So tell me, what are you thinking? I'm thinking. We don't just build something new, I said. We build it better. We build it right. He grinned. Good, because I've got a 42,000 square foot facility sitting idle in Brantford and a board that's tired of outsourcing everything to the States. I laid it out plainly. We'd recruit the best people. Vanessa had pushed out Thomas for systems and safety, Sheila for logistics, maybe even bring in Jennifer from QA. We'd focus on precision builds, small batch, high-integrity contracts. No fluff, no flair, just quality. Like it used to be. Douglas leaned back. You sure you're ready to start over at 59? I met his eyes. I'm not starting over. I'm picking up where we left off. before people stopped caring about how things were made. He tapped the table twice and nodded. That was the deal. That evening, I went back to the house and stood at the kitchen window. The neighborhood was quiet. Kids inside for dinner. A dog barked 2 doors down. Normal life. But something inside me was shifting. Not anger. Not pride. Clarity. When I turned in for the night, I looked at my calendar out of habit. It still had appointments from Anderson scheduled out weeks in advance. I crossed them out one by one, not in rage, but like someone carefully erasing pencil lines from a blueprint, not because the plan was wrong, but because it was time to draw something new. The next morning, I drove out to the Brantford site with Douglas. The place was dusty quiet and smelled like potential. Old machines still covered in plastic, steel racks lining the back wall. The kind of place most people would overlook. But I saw bones, and bones matter. We walked the floor in silence for a while. Then Douglas said, "Name it." I looked up at the rafters. Light filtered through like it always does in empty buildings. Keystone Dynamics, I said, because that's what we were at Anderson. The keystones, the whole parts they pulled out without thinking. Let's build something that holds. He nodded. Keystone Dynamics it is. That night, I called Thomas. We've got the space. We've got backing. And we're hiring. He was quiet for a moment. Then, send me the specs. There was something in his voice. Something like hope. Like someone who'd been sinking, finally saw a rope drop in from above. Vanessa may have fired me, but she'd also set something loose. Something that wasn't going back in the box. The first delivery came on a Monday morning. 3 industrial crates, stamped with our new name, Keystone Dynamics. I stood at the edge of the loading dock, with frost in my beard and a clipboard in hand watching the forklift back into position. The air smelled like steel and diesel, honest smells, the kind that stay in your clothes for the rest of the day. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press release, no launch party, just the sound of machinery rolling over concrete. That's how I wanted it. We weren't here for headlines. We were here to work. Inside, Thomas was already mapping out the floor plan with a red marker and a roll of tape. You remember when we didn't even have CAD? He asked without looking up. Just grease pencils and whiteboards. I remember, I said, walking beside him. I also remember when a full spec sheet fit on one page instead of a PowerPoint deck. We both smiled. That kind of smile between men who've been in the trenches and who still had a few fights left in them. But not everyone shared our nostalgia. Vanessa had gone public 2 weeks earlier, interviewed in a glossy business magazine, praising her aggressive modernization strategy. She called us legacy staff resistant to change. She said she'd cleared out inefficiencies. I read the article twice. Once for facts. The second time to feel what it was meant to provoke. It didn't make me angry. Not anymore. But it did tell me something important. She still thought this was about the past. She hadn't realized we were building her competition. That week, we onboarded 3 more former Anderson employees. Sheila from logistics, Craig from welding, and Jason, our best young programmer, who had left quietly after Vanessa gutted the automation department. They didn't ask for titles. They asked for purpose. Just tell me what needs doing, Sheila said, rolling up her sleeves. We'll figure the rest out. And we did. Every day that followed felt like laying bricks in the dark, trusting the wall would hold. Orders were light at first, a few small contracts from local vendors. But it wasn't about volume, it was about proving we could still deliver precision, still meet deadlines, still give a damn. Then came the first snag, a bad shipment of steel piping. The supplier blamed weather. We'd vetted them twice. But the dimensions were off by 1.5 millimeters, enough to ruin everything downstream. Thomas slammed the gauge on the table. This would have slipped right through at Anderson today, he muttered. I nodded. That's why we're not Anderson. We halted production, remeasured everything, called the supplier and demanded a correction. It put us behind by 72 hours. But when the order went out, the client called us personally to say nobody's caught that kind of error for us in years. That night, I drove home through snow flurries, quiet streets, porch lights glowing behind curtains, and I thought about how strange it was that doing things right had become the exception, not the standard. I pulled into my driveway, shut the engine off, and just sat there for a moment, listening to the tick of the engine cooling. You don't always realize when a chapter is closing until the silence makes it obvious. And in that silence, my phone rang. I glanced down. Charles Harper. I hesitated, but I answered. Stanley, he said, his voice slower than I remembered. I heard you've got something going. I do. Thomas, too. Among others. He was quiet. Then I made a mistake. I didn't say anything. He continued. Vanessa's cut corners, sold equipment, laid off teams I told her to protect. Now she's losing contracts. Clients are calling me asking what's happened. I sighed. You gave her the keys. I know, he said. That's why I'm calling. There was a long pause. Can we meet? I looked out at the snow, dancing under the streetlight. This wasn't a man asking to be rescued. It was a man admitting he'd handed the wheel to someone who didn't know the road. Tomorrow, I said. My place. 7 a.m. We'll talk. Thank you. I hung up and stayed in the truck a little longer, not because I was unsure of what to do, but because somehow I already knew. This story wasn't done yet. The sun hadn't quite risen when Charles pulled into my driveway the next morning. I watched from the kitchen window as he stepped out of the car. Slower than I remembered, a little thinner, but still upright, still proud. That kind of pride doesn't come from titles. It comes from years of building with your own hands. I opened the door before he knocked. Coffee? I asked. He nodded. Black. We sat at my old pine kitchen table. Same table Linda and I bought the first year we were married. The surface still had faint scratches from when the kids used to do homework on it. I should have called you sooner, Charles said. I didn't answer. Just handed him his mug and waited. She's not ready, Stanley. And I was too tired to fight her. I thought maybe, if she made a few mistakes, she'd learn. But this isn't learning. It's wreckage. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder worn at the edges. Financials, he said. Quarterlies, vendor complaints, client cancellations. She's running the company into the ground, stripping it for cash, talking about relocating operations to Florida. Miami, I asked. He looked up. You already know. I nodded. She's been selling off the custom equipment. We picked up some of it at auction. Charles closed his eyes for a second, like the weight of that truth needed room to land. I built that place to last, he whispered, and I left it in the hands of someone who thinks lasting doesn't matter anymore. The house was quiet around us, only the soft hum of the fridge and the ticking clock above the stove. So I asked, "What do you want from me?" He opened his eyes. "Steady now. I want you to come back." I didn't speak. "I want you to save what can still be saved." I've got the board's attention. They're scared and they're open to change, but it needs to happen fast. I stared at my coffee. Let the silence stretch. "It's not about me being angry," I said. "It's not about revenge." "I know," Charles replied. "That's why I came to you. Because you're the only one who still sees the long game." That afternoon, Thomas and I walked the floor of Keystone, our floor, watching the lines run, seeing the team we'd built from scratch take shape. "Are we really going back?" he asked. "Not back," I said. "Forward." What does that even mean? I looked around. At Jason, running diagnostics on a prototype. At Sheila coordinating the new parts inventory without even glancing at a spreadsheet. It means taking what we know, what we've built, and folding it into what's left over there. If there's anything worth folding into. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "So you're really going to sit across from her again?" "I already have." That evening, I drafted a proposal. Not a pitch, not a plea, a plan. Restructure the company. Absorb Harper's custom hydraulics unit into Keystone. Leave the rest to run under new leadership. Transparent, accountable, collaborative. It wasn't personal. It was practical. The next morning, Charles brought it to the board. 2 weeks later, I got the call. "The vote passed," he said. "She'll be notified today." And that's when I felt it, that twist you never quite expect. Not satisfaction, not even closure, just clarity. She had fired me with a smirk and a hair flip, called me outdated, irrelevant. Now, she'd learn what happens when the foundation you tear down decides to rebuild itself somewhere else. That night, I stood at the edge of our new warehouse, empty except for a few machines and the echo of possibility. Snow drifting just outside the windows. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Not everything needs to be loud, to be powerful. Some reckonings arrive softly and still change everything. She didn't recognize me at first. I was standing in the back of the conference room. Harper's quarterly all-staff meeting, the one Vanessa had insisted be mandatory even for remote workers. The space buzzed with nervous energy. Young executives in slim suits clutched presentation clickers, eyes flicking toward the board table like school children waiting to be graded. Vanessa stood at the head, poised, polished, and entirely unaware of the storm waiting in the wings. Behind her slides projected data that danced around the truth. Revenue down, output delayed, contracts lost. She called it a market recalibration. Then she saw me. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, pointing across the room like she'd spotted a ghost. The board chairman stood, calm, unbothered. "Vanessa," he said, "the board has made a decision. We're proceeding with a merger." Her face fell pale and defiant all at once. "This is absurd," she spat. "I'm the majority shareholder." Charles rose slowly from his seat, his cane tapping once against the linoleum. "No," he said gently. "You own 20%. I retained 51, and I've cast my vote." I stepped forward, folder in hand. "Harper Machinery will merge with Keystone Precision. The board approved the agreement this morning." She stared at me, and in her eyes, the years between us disappeared. No MBA, no title, just a daughter who thought she could erase what her father had built. "You can't do this." Thomas stepped through the side door calm as ever. "Actually," he said, "we already have." I slid the documents across the table. "The custom hydraulics division will continue under our oversight. The rest of the company will restructure under new leadership." Vanessa flipped through the folder, hands trembling. "This is—" She couldn't finish. "It's business," I told her quietly. "Nothing personal." A year later, I stood on the catwalk above the factory floor. The facility had doubled in size. Harper's legacy fused with Keystone's ambition. Not as a takeover, but a transformation. Machines hummed in rhythm. Workers I'd trained decades ago now mentored the next generation. Jennifer ran the new quality lab. Jason led development. Thomas, ever the architect, was designing our next expansion. And Charles, he stood beside me, leaning on his cane, but smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. "She called again," he said. "Vanessa." He nodded. "From Miami. She's launching a consulting firm. Asked if I'd invest. Will you?" I told her no. But then she called back this morning. Asked if the offer still stood. If she came back and started from the floor. We were both quiet for a long moment. I told her yes, he said softly. I didn't respond. Just looked down at the floor below where something rare was happening, respect and innovation coexisting. Legacy and change, not in conflict, but in conversation. Charles turned to me. "When I added that severance clause in your contract, I thought it was just about retention. I didn't realize." I smiled. Neither did I. And there we stood, not as boss and employee, not as father figure and stand-in son, but as two builders, watching a company reborn, not in spite of hardship, but because of it. Because sometimes losing everything that didn't matter is the only way to save what truly does.